Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I am your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Well, hello, Judy, and hello, viewers and listeners. We've got another interview this time.
Yes,
it's
we do.
fun when we do our interviews, and we have this interview is with Dr. Joe Casciani.
Casciani, yes.
You said it right when you introduced him, fortunately. And we've already done the interview, and we think it's really neat. And if you have any interest, well, why don't you tell folks the title of this podcast?
Can I live to 100? Do I want to? An interview with Dr. Joe Casciani.
Yes. So shortly we will be cutting over to the interview. You'll be hearing Judy introduce, and then we'll do the interview. But before we do that, couple of little announcements we want to make. One is we got a review. I don't want to say review to end all reviews, but we got a really nice review of our podcast that we just can't resist sharing with you. So, Judy, why don't you read this review we got from?
Okay, this comes from Sue.
From Sue.
And Sue says, as an avid consumer of podcasts, particularly ones about relationships and therapy, I was delighted to discover the Couples Therapy in 7 Words podcast. Co-host Judy Alexander and Dr. Bruce Chalmer utilize their unique combination of professional expertise and practical experience to deliver clear, evidence-based advice about relationship and couples therapy. I have learned so much from their insightful dialogues and from their interviews with a wide variety of guests.
She hadn't even heard this one yet.
I know. Judy and Bruce maintain a sense of humor even while discussing difficult topics. I appreciate their willingness to share examples from their own lives and relationships. I look forward to every new episode.
Aw, shucks.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Sue. That is lovely. And I think I mentioned we did a little promo about this when we first got it. I love it when somebody's review is praising the stuff that I feel is we're most proud of. Do you know what I mean? She really nailed the stuff I think that we really are trying to do. We're trying to be, combine professional expertise and practical experience and the humor and the general sense of, we're trying to exemplify our couples therapy in 7 words: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. We're not just saying that, we're trying to embrace that as we do it.
And I think we live it.
And we certainly try.
And I think that comes across, and that's what we hear in a lot of our feedback. So thank you for writing that in, Sue. And we'd love to hear from our other listeners. If you have something nice to say and would like to review us, please do.
And we now have a new website. It is, instead of the old one that I used to use, my own practice website, brucechalmer.com, we've got couplestherapyin7words.com. So you can, if you want to write us your feedback, you can send it to Judy at couplestherapyin7words.com or Bruce at couplestherapyin7words.com, and it will get to us. And you can also go to the couplestherapyin7words.com website. Boy, that's a mouthful, isn't it?
That is a mouthful. And 7 is spelled out, not,
yes.
Not the number 7, S-E-V-E-N.
S-E-V-E-N, right. So we look forward to having you do that. And while you're there at that website, by golly, you can get our merch. For those of you who are not watching this, we're holding up our beautiful Couples Therapy in 7 Words mugs.
Right, in the 11-ounce size and the 15-ounce size.
And on one side, they have our lovely logo that actually Judy designed, I have to say. And the other side has our inspiring message: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And we also have T-shirts that have the same logo on one side and the message on the other. And they are lovely T-shirts. They're very comfy. They're nice. It's nice material. T-shirt material. Very nice T-shirt material.
Yeah.
And so we invite you, and available in all the sizes you can imagine.
Right. It's not schlock.
It's not schlock. It's nice material.
Nice material.
Yeah. You can, my grandfather, may he and my grandmother, my grandparents were in the men's clothing business and the schmata trade. So we know whereof we speak, folks. What can I tell you? And also, before we cut over to the interview, we want to also put in a nice little word for the book.
That started it all. Reigniting the Spark: Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
And it's available anywhere books are sold. I got to tell you, just looking at the Amazon sales, people are buying the audiobook like crazy. It's really interesting. Anyway, you can get it on the audiobook. I did the narration. I happen to think that makes it especially sort of credible in the narration department.
Well, as they say, it's in your voice.
It's definitely in, yes, you say it's in the writer's voice. Well,
Yes,
literally so in that case.
literally in this case.
And you can also get it on paper, as I just showed you, and you can also get it on Kindle as
Right.
well. So we hope you will do that. So
Enjoy our interview.
the first thing you'll hear will be Judy doing the intro, and we will see you on the other side of the interview.
Our guest today is Dr. Joseph Casciani. Dr. Casciani has a 40-year history in the field of aging as a psychologist and manager of mental health practices. For 16 years, he was the clinical lead for a large mental health practice where he oversaw mental health programs for patients in hundreds of nursing homes in 8 states. He is past president of Psychologists in Long-Term Care and former board member of a national consortium of geropsychology and training programs. He is the author of the Handbook of Health and Behavior, Living Longer is the New Normal, and other publications. Concept Healthcare, also known as CoHealth, is his former company, named to emphasize the importance of behavioral health concepts in the care of older adults. In 2018, he extended his professional interest in aging to his new venture, the Living to 100 Club. Their website offers a collection of strategies and resources on successful aging, and his weekly podcast on aging and longevity continues in this tradition with guests who share their professional insights and individuals with personal stories about overcoming their own obstacles. Joe, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Judy, thank you very much. I'm excited to be part of your program.
We're delighted to have you here. You know, when someone mentions a 40-year history studying aging, and I'm thinking, well, I've developed quite an interest in aging, but I would have to say much more recently, especially since I turned 70. So I am curious about your journey, which sounds like it was fairly early on. What was your journey to getting into studying
Early.
aging?
I started out as a young guy, believe me.
Mm.
So, yeah, shortly after I got licensed, I took a position with a county mental health inpatient geropsychiatric program. So inpatient for psychiatric older adults. I did that for a couple of years. Then a colleague and I bid on a proposal for the Department of Aging here in California to write a training manual. And it was the first time California was putting any money into training their nursing home staff on mental health topics. Well, lo and behold, we were awarded a contract. It was a 3-year program. We wrote the manual and we brought it around the state, 36 different seminars to train the trainers, so to speak. All nursing homes have staff developers, so they were at our seminars, and we talked about depression and adjustment disorders and family issues and dementia, behavior problems. And it was a great experience because it allowed me to really understand the issues that older adults were facing in nursing homes. And shortly after that, Medicare came along and changed their reimbursement policies for the first time, allowing psychologists to get paid by Medicare.
I remember that happening, actually, being a psychologist myself. I remember when I could start taking Medicare.
Yeah, it was huge. It was huge, and not just for testing, but also for therapy. So that was a great experience. And then I teamed up with a physician, and we started back when we began, it was Senior Psychology Services. 10 years later, we changed it to VeriCare. But the procedure was to contract with skilled nursing facilities, hire psychologists, and place the psychologists in these facilities to see patients who were referred for mental health services. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a number of years, as you said in the intro, Judy, about 16 years. I sold that company. I didn't sell it. I left when the venture capitalists came in. It just changed the whole flavor of the company.
It can stop being fun then, right?
No,
not so much fun.
I tell this story and people always nod their heads. Yes, I understand. Yeah, it changed it completely. And it wasn't comfortable for me. So I left. I had a non-compete for a year. And then after that, I started my own group doing the same thing, limiting it to only 2 states, California and Texas, but hiring psychologists, placing them in the facility. And, it's a great experience because there are a lot of patients that really benefit from, just some support. And help and, guidance and, here's how to cope with your medical decline. Here's how to deal with, your family members who are abandoning you or you perceive them to be abandoning you. Anyway, there's a lot of issues. So I did that and sold that company in 2018. And, it was a great, rewarding career in nursing homes, but I was ready to do something that had, offered a little more fun. So I started the Living to 100 Club. And for me, that's just a way to reach people in the community who are looking at aging, and let's talk about successful aging and, what strategies can we adopt to live longer, live healthier, live happier. And my thing, a little twist on my approach is that there's always going to be some bumps along the way. We know it's not a smooth road, and I saw that in nursing homes, and it's no different from people living still independently. There's always going to be bumps. So how do we manage those obstacles? That's, to me, that's the key. How do we interpret these events that come along? Because the way we cope with it is going to color how well we manage it, how well we get beyond it, if we can get beyond it. I'm talking about physical decline and maybe losses, personal losses, loss of a spouse, maybe, losing a pet, maybe giving up the car keys, maybe a stroke, maybe a fall, any number of different hurdles. And I'm not minimizing them, they're serious, but let's see if there are ways we can help the person get beyond it.
Yeah, well, since we're a podcast about couples, we're especially interested in how aging affects couples. And I know you just touched on some of the things with health issues and driving, but what else could you tell us about that?
Well, there's so many important issues about, how we manage our social relationships, our interpersonal relationships and couples. And one person might be very positive and another person might be, just kind of have this negative stereotype about.
Spoiler alert, wait till you hear our listener question.
Oh yeah.
So you'll hear that's very much on point. Yeah, do go on.
When a wife has negative thoughts about aging, some of the research has said the husband gets physically sick.
Wow.
And when the husband has negative thoughts about aging, those negative stereotypes, the wife gets depressed. And I haven't seen this, across the board, but that's what some of the research is saying. So there is that interpersonal relationship and how we support each other as we age. And to me, the big thing is, the loss of a spouse. Maybe after, 10 years, 20 years, 30 or 40 years. And one spouse says, I can't go on. There's no way I can face my future alone. It looks too dark. So yeah, we deal with some of the loss and the grief and, help the person with that bereavement. So there's a lot of different dimensions about couples and how we collectively deal with the aging process. Yeah.
It's one of the things, actually, there's kind of two sides of that chasm I want to touch on, actually, the chasm of, before you've lost someone and then maybe after. But in both cases, I'm thinking of things that are actually fairly positive rather than just, the grief aspect. But while couples are together, we've been curious, and it's funny, we were looking for someone who could talk about the sex life of seniors. And we're having a hard time finding somebody who was like very specific about that, but we're sort of hoping, gee, maybe that's you. What do I want to ask? Like, have any good sex tips for seniors? I mean, what might you say about that?
It's certainly an important issue, our sexual functioning, maintaining that level of intimacy. There's still the concern about sexual performance, of course. And, there's so many expectations about being able to perform, sexually into our 60s and 70s. And that puts more pressure on, of course. And there are some medical concerns, physical limitations that come into the picture. And, impotence is not uncommon. And certainly there's a lot of, buzz about that with the medications and all, but we have to maintain that, that notion that there is no norm. Let's take the pressure off what the expectations are and what society says we should be doing. And
Oh,
I
with
think, of
sex, of course, it's a lot more than intercourse.
course,
There's all kinds of
Right.
things people can be physically intimate and sexually intimate that doesn't necessarily involve the guy having his erection work.
without the intercourse, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I remember saying older adults make love less often, but mean it more.
Mm-hmm.
So it's again, it's getting away from some of those stereotypes about what we should be able to do. And we compare ourselves to ourselves. We can't compare ourselves to our neighbors or relatives. And gee, he tells me about all his great evenings with his wife. Let's look at ourselves. So
Mm-hmm. Sure.
let's not be stuck in that pressure to perform.
One of the, I don't know if you're familiar with David Schnarch's work. He just died a couple of years ago, actually. But he wasn't writing specifically about seniors particularly, but he didn't say he was a sex therapist. I guess he was a couples therapist, but he talked a lot about sex as sort of a way of looking at relationships more generally. And one of the things Schnarch used to say was, he would ask if he was giving a lecture, he would say, at what age do you think people reach their sexual peak? And, the stereotypical responses would be, well, women later than men, maybe women in their 30s and 40s, but men in their 20s, And he would say, no, I think both men and women reach their sexual peak in their 70s, 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And the reason he was talking about was precisely maturity, that, yes, indeed, as people get older, they're not capable of the sexual gymnastics they might have been able to figure out, early on, but they're much more able to tolerate intimacy.
Yeah.
And that's something
and talk about it
and
in a
talk
more
about
meaningful way than
Yeah.
probably when they were
Yeah, it
young.
is that capacity for interpersonal connection, and I call it kind of a tolerance for kind of disappointment and
Mhm.
setbacks, and let's not get thrown by what happened last night in the bedroom, or let's not get thrown by an argument or some disagreement. It's the whole notion of um, being able to understand and accept and tolerate the disappointments without it coming into our emotions and letting the emotions take over. But when the
Mhm.
emotions take over, that's when we get into trouble. Let's
Yeah.
keep
Oh,
the
yeah.
emotions out of the discussion, right? Yeah.
So the other side of the the loss chasm, so to speak, when a person has lost maybe a long-term partner, and this has come up in my work with folks over the years. Mostly now I'm a couples therapist. Is dating. The dating as a senior, older person is very different from what it was when people were in their teens and 20s. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts around that, or do you work with folks around that, like forming relationships and dating and that whole scene?
Yeah. Again, I think the pressure to deliver or perform and be at your peak in any social situation is always difficult. We always need companionship. There's no substitute for that need for companionship. I mean, there are some people that prefer to live, in as I won't say isolated, but prefer to live alone, and that's fine. But for the mainstream, we do need that companionship, and I think it's the idea that we have to be vulnerable when we're, meeting new people. We go to a social event, we go to some senior community center or whatever, and we have some conversations. But we have to be vulnerable to, being open and
Mhm.
not letting those, yeah, it's not letting the ego get in the way of having a satisfying kind of level of communication. Again, it's that stereotype about having to perform, and I keep coming back to that. But
Mhm.
it's let's get away from those ageist stereotypes, and don't let. I always like to say, don't let yesterday define who you are today.
Mhm.
Let's be willing to open some new doors. And yeah, we've maybe a spouse passed away after years of a terrible medical condition, and we felt overburdened by that. So that's important to recognize and let go, and continue to try to kind of redefine ourselves today.
Mm-hmm.
I
Sure.
think that's key, because um, don't let what happened 10 years ago or yesterday color how we're viewing our world today. We
Sure.
have to be ready to adapt to new situations. And that means, I think that means making new contacts and reaching out to people. And maybe we never did that in the past, but let's try it now. Let's strike up the conversation. Let's
I've
make a
had
call.
I've had folks, older folks who have lost a spouse, and they've, in addition to dealing with the grief, especially if it's been after a long illness or something like that, and they've had to deal with their own sense of guilt if they actually want to meet someone and get involved. And then, of course, there's the issues dealing with family who may resent it. It's like, the concept of some person in their late 70s or 80s or something like that, not waiting a year after someone has died, but feeling like, hey, I haven't got that much time. I want to get going.
Yeah.
And that can be a tricky thing with family and a tricky thing for the person themselves as well.
Yeah, I think the adult children may have some real difficulty with mom or dad dating somebody new. Gee, we just lost, you just lost your spouse, and here you are striking up some new relationships. But that's, they can have their opinion, but it's, we're entitled to do whatever we want as long as we're, still cognitively intact and we don't have some dementia or Alzheimer's that's influencing our judgment. But yeah, we have the right in our 70s or 80s to have a new relationship, to maybe get married again or whatever. That we have to let go of some of those prohibitions that the adult children. We hear about that all the time. Where, gee, mom, what's the story here? I hear you're dating already. So.
That brings up an interesting point, though. How do you deal with somebody who does have some cognitive impairment, and the children or some other member has a legitimate comes to you and says, she shouldn't be doing this because, not all the synapses are connecting right. And I'm really scared. How do you deal with that with the person?
That's a great question. It's a touchy area, Judy, because decisions are made all the time by people that their family members don't agree with. And they say, gee, I think mom's maybe lost it. She wants to write all these checks to this support group or whatever.
Yeah.
I think there's a time for an evaluation. There's a time for medical involvement, clinical kind of evaluation to see if decision making is intact. I have a good friend, Peter Lichtenberg, a psychologist, and he's got a program for assessing these decision-making capacities of older adults, and it's called the Older Adult Nest Egg. And Peter's done a great job. He's done work for decades on this area, and it is sensitive because people disagree with maybe the decisions, but there are times when they are influenced by some cognitive loss. So I think when there's a legitimate concern, you have to sit down with mom or dad and say, Dad, I'm really concerned. Would you be okay if we go talk with a specialist who can help just confirm that you're mentally intact? We don't want to attack the person because then they get defensive and they say, no. But let's even decisions managing their own home. We're concerned sometimes about, can he really take care of his home? And he would say, oh, leave me alone. I do fine. I can handle it. But you have to approach it like, gee, maybe you need some help, or without causing the person to become defensive. So let's sit down. Can we have an honest discussion about how you're doing? And maybe we can look at some professional evaluation just to be sure that you're still able to make these.
The interesting ones are always the gray areas. I've had occasion to talk with folks who are saying, well, the good news is the person you're worried about still clearly does have the capacity to, they're not exhibiting signs of such dementia that they really can't make their own decisions. That's the good news. Of course, the bad news is they may make decisions that you totally disagree with.
Yeah.
And so it is those gray areas of the tricky ones. This might be
it's seldom black and white. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Black and white. It is the gray area. But the important part is that without putting the person on defensive, because he or she is going to say, no, leave me alone. I'm okay. I have the right to do what I want.
Sure.
So it has to be approached like, look, we want to understand what your thinking is. We want to help. We want to be, we all want to be sure that this is right.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of honest approach and conversation without making the judgment. Once we make the judgment, we lose our objectivity, and then the emotion just kind of comes into
Sure.
the discussion. Yeah.
So yeah, this let's segue to our listener question.
Right.
As I mentioned earlier, this is like right up your alley. So Judy will read the
You may have
question.
answered some of it already.
I'll
Yeah.
go for it.
Okay, so Mary writes, Dear Dr. Chalmer, I am a healthy, vibrant 78-year-old woman. I recently retired as a social worker where I worked for a nonprofit group that finds housing for low-income families. I have been married to Jim for 25 years. It's a second marriage for both of us. Jim is 80 years old and has been retired for 10 years, having been a CPA. I have always been active in my church, and even during COVID, there's a lot that I do. I bake and bring meals to shut-ins. I crochet blankets for hospital patients. I walk every day with girlfriends. I go swimming, and I take classes at the local college or at the library. I would like to do more with Jim, but he never wants to do anything. I ask him to go for walks. He says his hip hurts. When I ask him to come to classes with me, he says he isn't interested. Frankly, I think he's depressed, but he won't go to a doctor. It was easier for me to overlook a lot of this while I was working, but now that I am home more, I see it more. Before I retired, Jim was doing the cooking and laundry. Now that I'm retired, he stopped doing both and said, I can do it. He has 2 grown children that live in another state. They have never been close with Jim, blaming him for the breakup of their parents' marriage since Jim had an affair. I was not the woman he had the affair with. I've spoken about this with them, and their response is, so what else is new? They see him as a selfish, self-centered man and don't seem to care.
Mm.
Another area of contention is sex. I would like to have a sex life, but Jim has lost all interest, and it's been at least 5 years since we've had any kind of sex life. He doesn't even kiss me anymore. I feel like I'm a babysitter for a big baby. I dread coming home whenever I go out because I know I'll come home to Jim sitting in front of the TV and not wanting to do anything. He won't socialize. He says it's because of COVID, but he won't even go over to eat outdoors at friends' homes. I told Jim things have to change or I will leave him. He just shrugs and says, I'm lucky I have a man since most of my friends' husbands have died. I don't feel lucky. I feel like I have an albatross. I fear that if I leave Jim, he'll waste away if he has no one to look after him. I don't want that for him, but I also don't want to stop living my life because of him. My widowed friends sound a lot like Jim in that they say, I'm lucky I still have a husband. I'd feel that way if he acted like a husband, but as already stated, that isn't the case. How can I get him to a doctor? I have suggested couples therapy, but he won't do that either. I don't want to leave him when he's down like this, but I have to look after myself too. Any advice? Okay, so we're going to turn it over to you, Joe,
Yeah.
the expert, and
Well,
what can
there's
you
a
tell
lot
Mary?
there.
There is a lot in there.
A lot there, of course. You know, just right off the top of my head, number one, it's hard to change behavior. It's hard to change our own behavior. It's doubly hard to change someone else's behavior. Number two, let's not lose sight of the positives here. She's outlining a lot of the negatives, a lot of the problems, a lot of the disappointments, the disagreements, but let's not lose sight. I mean, this is what I would say to her. Let's not lose sight of some of the good things in your relationship, in your marriage, because one thing that happens all the time is if we focus on what's wrong, it's like wearing blinkers. You know, horses are fitted with blinkers sometimes, so they're not distracted by what's going on. And we put these blinkers on, and we're limited to what we see in front of us. We don't see the whole picture. So let's take the blinkers off and let's look at the whole picture, and not just dwell on what's wrong or the disappointments. So I would say I think there's a chance that the husband may be depressed. maybe kind of resigned and feeling like there's no positives in his future. Maybe there is some kind of a negative forecasting, and he doesn't see any benefit to improving things. I would also add that she, I forget her name, but
Mary.
Yeah.
Mary, she needs to understand that she's free to live her own life, and she needs to make decisions with or without her husband. And we can talk about that approach in a second. But first of all, she needs to continue living her life and having fulfilling activities and relationships and contacts. And the more she can do that, having retired, maybe it's time to look at some new, not a career or a profession, but a new job, something else that gives her enjoyment. It sounds like she's very active with her volunteering, but maybe there's other things she can learn, maybe continue with classes, maybe learn a new language, maybe learn, play an instrument, maybe, participate in other activities. So she's on the right track, what I'm getting at. She's on the right track for all of that. In terms of changing the husband's behavior, I would look at small steps, right? Turtle steps. Okay, you don't want to go for a walk with me. Can we walk outside and just walk around the house? That's not going to tax your sore hip. Or let's look at small behaviors, because if we start looking at let's take a walk for 20 minutes, that's not going to happen. But if we can just go outside and maybe look at the neighbors' homes or something like that, that's a small step. And don't look for big changes. It's the small steps that the husband might be involved with. I think there may be some depression, and I would want to get that evaluated. So again, like this, the parent who's making these decisions, would you agree to go and talk with somebody? Because I'm really concerned. I don't want to lose our marriage. I'm committed to this. We're at it 25 years. I respect it. I respect you, and I respect your decision. But I want you to respect me, and maybe just talk with somebody to see if there's some other things that are influencing you and your decisions. It's not uncommon to have some feelings of depression in our where we are in our life. So would you consider talking with a professional, or maybe just getting some quick evaluation?
Yeah,
So
and that it sounds like, in terms of what she wrote, that she had tried some of that, and I wonder on some level, her writing a letter like that and her saying she's kind of had it, that often, it's usually gendered this way too, that's often a motivator for a guy who's otherwise just saying, oh, you're lucky to have me. If she says, well, I may be lucky to have you, but I'm actually considering leaving you. So,
yeah.
It's funny, ultimatums get a bad name, but sometimes they have a place. If someone is saying, well, I simply won't accept this without changing it, so if you won't change it, I'm going to change it a different way, that can be very motivating for somebody sometimes.
It can be. It can also backfire, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I would never suggest someone threaten to leave if they don't intend to actually leave.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Yeah, because that's going to make him more defensive and maybe dig his heels in even more.
It could, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the risk there.
Mhm.
So and I say don't. Tenacity and perseverance are very powerful, and
Mhm.
staying at it, and look for the small changes, not the big ones. Look for the small thing, something that you did today that you didn't do yesterday. That's big. And just continue, not giving up, not throwing our hands up and say, I'm done with him, I'm out of here. But let's continue it. At some point, Mary's going to say, okay, I've tried everything, I've doubled up everything, and I can't get anywhere. So,
Sure.
but before that happens, look for the positives and look for the small changes.
And it's interesting. The flip side for someone in Mary's position is that she may discover that if she left him, she wouldn't be any happier, because she still would, because she sounds like basically a decent person. She would still worry about, leaving a guy who's having a hard time taking care of himself.
Right.
And so it could turn out that she could take a different look at it and say, all right, I'm not going to expect much from him, but I guess I can be okay in my life and, do what I can do for him. And there's some things I can't fix, but I guess I can be okay not fixing them. it would be about adjusting her own expectations as well. So.
Yeah. It's kind of taking the spotlight off of him and his reluctance to do anything. That's all he hears from her, and that's what that's his whole life. So let's take the spotlight off of that, take the pressure off of him, and get out of his way. And like I said, make the small suggestions, look for the small changes.
Sure.
And she might be surprised.
Well, I hope Mary, and we changed their names, by the way. So I'm suddenly realizing, gee, there's folks I've worked with who are named Mary, and there's folks I've worked with who are named Jim. I don't know if I've ever worked with a Mary and a Jim, but if I have, folks, it's not you. We make a point of changing the names. Not you.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Anything else we should be asking you about?
Well, I just want to add, though, it's process, right, more than content. It's the ability to discuss, have a conversation about these things without the emotion, without the anger, without the frustration, without this, because once that comes into the picture, everything gets clouded, and then people get defensive, and there's no more room for understanding and kind of movement. So let's remember to keep the emotion out of the picture whenever possible. The emotion, we have to respect the emotions, but don't let them control us, because when they control us, they really hold us back.
So you've been working for a while with long living people. Do you find a common thread about those that live long, good lives, that stay healthy? Is there something you could say, oh yeah, this is what I see among my nonagenarians or centenarians?
I think so much of it has to do with our mindset and our outlook and how we understand the aging process. But there is the importance of physical well-being and fitness and nutrition and proper approach to eating. And we can't think about living to 100 starting in our 80s. We have to start that in middle age, 40.
Sure.
So, but there are those necessary ingredients. If you understand if you heard of the blue zones,
Yes.
Nick Buettner and Dan Buettner, these regions around the world, and they found what are the common characteristics of the centenarians. And number one is physical activity. They're not running marathons, but they're very physical. They do a lot of gardening, and they walk to town, and they go up and down steps, and they're always doing something physical. The diet, plant-based foods, meat occasionally, 3 to 4 ounces, maybe once a week, but mostly healthy plants, legumes, vegetables, and all of that. And social contact, maintaining some connection with community. And I think the important one is having some sense of purpose, having some sense of meaning, something that gives us a feeling of reward. We wake up in the morning with a smile on our face, and we look forward to doing whatever it is. And that's key. I think that's one of the central ingredients to longevity. And alcohol and moderate amounts, but the centenarians can teach us a lot. We've learned a lot about people who are living into their over 100. So for me, it's mindset. It's understanding that I'm going to have some bumps along the way, but I'm going to persevere, and I'm going to be tough, and I'm going to recognize my strengths, and I'm going to celebrate my age. I'm going to celebrate because I have the wisdom, I have the tolerance, I have the maturity, I have the decision making, and all of that comes with 70, 80 years. So that's strong. We used to dread aging, right? Our parents and grandparents and generations ago, they would really see aging as a time of frailty and weakness and dependence and helplessness. And that's changing. That's what's great that's happening today. Whoever's doing this marketing, it's working, because we now see aging as a positive place. And it's time to recognize, we can give up our careers, we can change jobs, we can start new things, but there's a lot of doors to be opened as we age and as we get into our 70s and 80s and 90s. So a lot of it is perseverance and that mindset, but also the necessary ingredients to staying healthy.
Oh, yeah. I think, that sense of meaning, if I were going to say, well, can I live to 100? And then the question is, do I want to live to 100? And it's the sense of meaning that makes that difference for me. I would feel like, yes, I would like to live to whatever age. Obviously, I'd love to stay healthy. But if I'm feeling a sense of meaning, that's what makes me want to get up in the morning and keep on living.
Yeah.
And that's really central. And of course, that the positive attitude is really a big part of that sense of, I also, the word that I throw around, we call this podcast Couples Therapy in 7 Words. And the 7-word formula we've talked about, or that I made up many years ago, is be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And those things are kind of linked. The have faith part is the antidote to panic, but it's also the have faith is all about meaning. The sense that it doesn't have to be religious faith, but that basic sense that this whole project is a fundamentally good one, this whole project of living. And so to have that, to maintain that sense of meaning, and I've known folks. I remember a guy I worked with a number of years ago who died at 94 or something like that. And it's funny, he had been sent to me because he was showing considerable signs of depression after his wife died, but he was one of the most positive characters I've ever met. And he was he was so seizing of life for a guy who had been diagnosed with depression. It's sort of interesting. But I had wonderful conversations with him. And he was an example of that for me. He had this sense of, life is meaningful. It's amazing how all this stuff happens, but it's basically good.
Yeah, and the other point I would add, Bruce, is the notion of interconnectedness, that we're all connected.
Yeah.
There's, regardless of our how smart we are, how beautiful we are, how rich we are, we're all the same. And all of those attachments, all of those kind of accoutrements don't matter, because our worth is not dependent on how pretty we are or how smart we are, or how we all have the same value as people. Let's not get caught up in being better because we made more money or because we advanced farther in our career. We're all the same. And it's that interconnectedness, I think, that kind of gives everybody the same opportunity to feel strong about themselves and in their, as they look ahead into their future. It's that feeling that, even the poorest people on the planet still have that same value, and they still have that same sense of worth for their future. That to me it kind of cuts across a lot of the divisions that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that proposed statistic, gross national happiness, which I've seen. And I think Nepal comes up like super high on that. Israel comes up high on that. Numbers of countries. And I'm thinking especially countries like Nepal, where there's enormous amounts of what we would consider poverty.
Right.
But people, I hope I'm getting that one right. I know there's been a lot of unrest in Nepal also.
Yeah.
But it's often surprising to Western eyes to look at the results of some of that and say, wow, we don't score that high on that.
No, we don't.
In this country. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good example of it. Sure. Yeah. Happiness isn't dependent on, well, it is for some, but it doesn't have to be dependent on everything we accumulate.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been great conversation. I love talking about successful aging and managing those obstacles, and our attitude, and starting new chapters and all of that. So redefining ourselves, and the whole idea of what is it? Redefinition. How we can redefine ourselves, not based on where we were, but what we want for our future.
Sure.
It's a blank slate that we have ahead of us. It's a blank slate. We can write our own script.
I think you're right. And I think we see it, like you said earlier, about not having to feel that you need to be in one profession. You can reinvent yourself and do new things. I know, both of us have had, different professions over the years, and, you've had many businesses, in similar fields, but you're constantly selling and, starting something new. And that,
Speaking of which, by the way, this would be an opportune time to tell folks about your website. And when we do this, I'll put on the screen your website. So why don't you tell us about your website?
Yeah, happy to. Living200.club, not
I like the
.com or
.club. Yeah.
.club.
.club. Okay.
It's called a top level domain, upper level domain, or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a
TLD, top level domain. Yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah. So, it's got a collection of all my podcasts. I've done about 120 of them now. It's got some descriptions of my public speaking. I love to present to groups, senior organizations. It's got an opportunity for one-on-one coaching. And I love to do that one-on-one coaching. It's not psychotherapy. For different reasons, I'm just doing coaching these days because I want to be able to, look at this from a different perspective for people. And go to the website. You can sign up for my 9 tips for living longer. You can get a free PDF download. It's about 10 pages. It's a lot of what I've been talking about, but it's there for free, and you can get on my email list. I send out an announcement every Friday about the latest podcast. One came out just this morning about a podcast I did with Alexis Abramson, a gerontologist. It was great. Anyway, you can get on the list for that. And every month, every 4 to 5 weeks, I do a newsletter with kind of capturing a lot of the latest information on successful aging. So there's a lot of resources there on the website. And if people want to just have a simple call with me, they can book a brief call and chat and whatever. So yeah, I'm thrilled to be doing this. And the best part is that it's fun. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
That's why we're doing this too.
That's why we're doing it. Yeah, exactly. So Mary, we're going to suggest that you get in touch with Dr. Casciani.
Well, thank you, Joe, for doing this. And it's been a pleasure on our end as well.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm glad we could do this.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Joe Casciani and learned a lot about living to 100 and beyond.
And it's interesting. You can go to his website, as we mentioned, and it's living200.club, not .com, and you can learn a lot about that stuff. And I find it, the older I get, I have commented before that I seem to get older and you seem to not to, but
oh, you're so sweet.
I try. But in any case, those of us who are getting older, which is, let's say, most of us.
Oh, you keep me young.
Well, and you do that for me too. But it's good stuff, and it's more and more relevant stuff. We happen to live in Vermont, which I think is one of the highest average ages in the country, if not the
I think
highest.
It might be they call it the grayest state.
Yeah, indeed. So we're getting experience with that around here. So we hope you enjoyed that. And if you have other people you would like to suggest, you can write to us. If you just go to that couplestherapyin7words.com website, you can write to us. You can even sign up. There's a place, I'll have to make that a little clearer on the page. Judy just pointed out to me earlier today. But there's a place you can sign up for a slot on our schedule to be interviewed. We usually do our interviews on Fridays, and those are the times that get offered if you go to that slot. When you do that, you can sign up for a slot, and
And we could work at other times with you if,
absolutely,
if Friday doesn't work. So.
Yeah, and we'll ask you, of course, what do you want to be interviewed about? I will note, as I've said, been saying now for a while, the interviewees we've been having have been folks who have contacted us. Occasionally the other way around too, because we're always on the lookout.
Right.
But as this podcast grows in popularity, more and more people know about it, we're getting contacted by lots of really interesting folks. We have another one already lined up, and another one we're in the process of lining up, and so keep it coming, folks.
Right, and you probably already said if there are topics.
I didn't, but you say it.
Yeah, so in fact, that's how we found Dr. Casciani, is somebody had asked us if we could talk to somebody that had experience with a gerontological psychologist.
Although I think he wrote to us.
Did he? Did he contact us?
No, I think he contacted us. Well, whatever.
Anyway,
case, that's how we do it.
Somebody had asked us about that, so he came along at the right time. So.
Yep. Yes, he did. It was very timely when he came along. So just another word for I mentioned the website, another word for our lovely merchandise, our cups and our t-shirts. You can go, they make great gifts. And also another word for the book that started it all.
Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
And available anywhere books are sold.
Right.
And so until next time, remember,
Be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.